Hello there, world history students. Let's keep learning all about World War II. So, this one's called the Great Patriotic War. This is when the Allies are taking it back against the Axis powers. The Allies decide for a plan called Europe First. It's kind of we all come together and think that the Nazis are the more serious threat. So America, Britain, and the Soviet Union are going to put all their effort on taking the Nazis out of the war. America and Britain promise to invade Europe, retake it from the Nazis. The Soviet Union, they're going to start pushing back on their end. But what we decide to do especially is do an aerial campaign against the Nazis. And we start doing these bombing campaigns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of the war. And it's just almost unbelievable how many airplanes and bombs that the United States built. And we're just flying all over the skies of Europe, wrecking Germany's cities, wrecking their ability to make war. All right, let's check out some pictures here. Gotta click this button. So yep, here's the American Air Force coming in hard. Here we are fighting it out, and yeah, some Nazi planes are shooting our planes down. Here's the big leaders of the Allied powers, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. And here's a bunch of planes dropping bombs over German cities. Okay, and the Russian army by this time had totally recovered from their losses at the beginning of World War II, and they reorganized themselves as the Red Army. And their goal is to take all their land back from the Nazis. The Soviet Union, the Red Army, they built some incredible weapons of war. They built these really powerful battle tanks called the T-34. The T-34 could fight any German panzer that they could come up with. And then this really violent weapon the Soviet Union made was called the Katusha Rocket Launcher. They just put these special rockets on the back of a truck like this. And these rockets were designed to just explode over a huge area and cause just terrible, terrible damage. So let's check it out. All right, here's the Soviet Union on the attack. Here's this T-34. Here's all three of these countries punching Hitler at the same time. And here's the rockets coming in. And there's all these Katyushas just launching rockets at the Nazis. And here's a big fact that I really want my students to recognize. There's a lot of media in the United States saying how we won World War II and the importance of D-Day and the importance of all these battles American soldiers run against the Nazis. But honestly, like the vast, vast majority of this war was fighting between the Nazis and the Soviet Union. Even once we had D-Day and once American soldiers were fighting the Nazis, 80% of the German military was fighting the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union did far more fighting and far more dying than we ever did. And the German army was defeated at the Battle of Kursk. It was this really big battle. And despite the Soviet Union is now kind of winning the war, they always lost twice as many men as the Germans did. The Soviets just were constantly throwing people at the Nazis to just get them to get pushed back. All right, here's some pictures of the Battle of Kursk. It was this big old tank battle. Here they are fighting it out in real time. Here's a bunch of planes flying around. Planes and tanks. This is what World War II is all about. And then, yep, the Battle of Kursk. All right. Another really important thing I want you kids to know about the Soviet Union is, if you remember from my lesson about Russia, the Soviet Union never really cared what gender you were. And the Soviet Union became the only country in world history to accept women in fighting roles during this war. And their army had almost 1 million women who were on active combat duty fighting against the Nazis. So when we're sort of thinking like, how is it that the Soviets had so many more people? Well, because they used women in the fight too. And I'll definitely argue without women in the battlefield, the Soviet Union could not have beaten the Nazis. But yeah, by far the biggest female military participation ever out of any culture in the history of the world. So good job, girls. Thanks for fighting the Nazis. I appreciate it. I want to point out one specific Soviet female soldier. This is Major Ulmatayev Palachenko. She was known by the Nazis as the man killer. She was a sniper who killed 309 German soldiers. 36 of them were enemy German snipers themselves. And 9 out of the 10 best snipers in world history were Soviet men and women. So the Soviet Union really, really good at picking off the Nazis. I know that Major Palachenkov, she actually became a history teacher after World War II. So I thought that was so cool. All right, let's check it out. So here's a Soviet women fighting the Nazis, making it happen. Soviet girls getting guns, fighting back, serving in the military. Good job, Soviet Union. Okay, and I've already referenced this a little bit. So on June 6, 1944, the British and the Americans, we finally joined the ground war against the Nazis. We land our guys on the beaches of Normandy in an event called D-Day. It was a very difficult invasion. It was probably one of the most deadly days in American military history, but we are successful. We get our guys on the beaches. We start pushing into France, and now Hitler's under attack on the ground by two sides. Look, I am kind of a World War II expert, and I can tell you all about the American experience after D-Day, but hopefully you'll learn all about that in your American history class. I got to focus on kind of the world effort here. So, but yes, D-Day was a very, very important moment. This was looking real bad for Germany's chances of winning the war. All right, so here's a bunch of Americans now getting on the beaches of France. Here's guys parachuting in. Here we are wading through the beaches and fighting on the beaches. All right. So now let's talk about the war in the Pacific. So it's true that we did decide to focus more of our military effort on fighting the Nazis with the whole Europe first thing. But the United States said, okay, we're going to give maybe about half or 60% of our stuff against the Nazis, and we're going to put 40% of our stuff against the Japanese. But as you knew from my last video lesson, the United States was building so much military equipment, it was insane. And so we were just flooding the Pacific Ocean with more airplanes, with more ships than the Japanese knew what to do with. And another big kind of problem for the Japanese is the Pacific has just thousands, maybe even millions of islands. And the Japanese knew that if the United States just got their hands on kind of a series of islands, we could just kind of keep moving up and up and up and up and get closer and closer to Japan. We didn't have to take over every single island. And like, for example, here's a picture of the Solomon Islands. We knew that the Japanese had really big fortresses on this island and this island. So what did the Americans decide to do? We just skipped them. We attacked the Japanese at the places where they were the weakest, and then when all these Japanese soldiers are hanging out on this island, we just leave them alone, and whenever some kind of enemy ship or enemy plane comes to reinforce them, we just shoot them down. So we sort of like turned many Japanese islands into these like kind of lost outposts that didn't do anything for Japan. And that whole strategy is called island hopping, where we just ignored certain Japanese islands. And within 2 years, the United States makes the biggest navy in world history. And we just send all we got against the Japanese. We rebuild all of our ships that got lost at Pearl Harbor and are coming at them hard. Well, Japan recognizes that they're in trouble. So they decide to use this new tactic that really freaked out the American Navy. The Japanese turned their airplanes themselves into suicide bombs. They filled their planes with bombs and ordered their pilots to just fly their planes straight into American ships. And kamikazes were relatively successful. They did destroy several American ships. But it just showed like Japan was really running out of steam and running out of resources. And every year we were pushing in closer and closer to the home islands of Japan themselves. All right, let's check out some of these pictures. Look at all those American planes. Holy cow, we're just taking over the sky. And look at all these ships. This is as far as the eye can see. And most of these are aircraft carriers too. Here comes America. All right, and yep, here's the American Navy outside Okinawa. A lot of those are Liberty ships, just bringing in more soldiers and supplies to attack the Japanese. And yep, we're just kind of spreading out in all directions, but only hitting the Japanese where they're weak. And then these are kamikaze planes trying to fly at our ships, where we are doing the island hopping thing, and we're pushing in, and the whole objective is to get close to Japan, knock them out of the war. All right. So yeah, and over the course of World War II, it's almost impressive that very few Japanese soldiers ever surrendered. They have this whole concept called Bushido, if you remember from my unit about Japan, talk about kind of the samurai code, how it's dishonorable to surrender. So the Japanese, they would put up these incredible fights even when their soldiers were starving. And I've got some pictures here of Japanese soldiers who clearly haven't had much to eat, but they were still fighting against the Americans. But kind of a really cruel thing that happens is Emperor Hirohito. He gives a radio address telling civilians and soldiers to commit suicide instead of surrendering to the United States. And once we get to some of these islands closer to Japan, those islands have Japanese women and children on them, and they follow the emperor's orders instead of surrender to the Americans. So I think that's really, really brutal and really sad. Okay, so here are these rocks in the island of Saipan where many people fell to their deaths. Here's Japanese soldiers charging at the Americans with knives at the end of their rifles because they ran out of bullets. Here's some Japanese soldiers. They're clearly starving. Here's another picture, one of these guys. And actually, this is in Japanese. I think this says something like, this guy's a coward for surrendering. He should have kept fighting. But I think it would be really hard for you to put up an effective fight when you really don't have the energy to do it. Okay, and so America, yes, we invade Saipan, we invade Guadalcanal. Once we take Iwo Jima and Okinawa, those islands are close enough that we can start launching aerial assaults against Japan. And so the same thing we were doing against the Nazis, we start bombing the Japanese every day. And we're blowing up their cities, raining hell on them from the skies. And also by this time, the United States had built way better airplanes. The Japanese had been using the Zero at the start of the war, which was the fastest plane in the world at that time. But over the course of World War II, we developed some significantly better fighter planes, some better long-distance bombers, and Japan was just getting so outclassed technologically and industrially, they really didn't have a chance to fight against us. All right, so here it comes. The Americans launching attacks against Japan. Here we are raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. Here we are blowing up some of Japan's airplanes. Here's a bomber plane that was used against Japan. I'm not going to read what the pilots wrote on the side of that plane. And here we are dropping leaflets on Japan. The United States sent this around Japan saying, hey, people of Japan, if you live near a factory, it's probably going to get blown up. Like, don't work in factories if you want to save your life. But many Japanese people still continue to work to the end because the emperor asked them to. And here's American bombers flying by Mount Fuji near the city of Tokyo. Okay, so America developed firebombing, all right? And now this is something I really want to emphasize because I think it's really neglected in a lot of world history discussions. Firebombing is a pretty incredible technique. It requires something like 1,000 airplanes to do it. And what happens is you wait for a really hot, windy day, usually in the summertime, and you send first 300 airplanes to just drop this kind of fire-starting chemical all over a city. Okay? And then you send in another 300 airplanes to drop more or less matches all over the city. And those matches will then fall on the city, they'll start fires, and the chemical that was dropped in the first wave of bomber planes will make the fires significantly more intense. Okay, and then a third wave of bombers will fly over the city, and they'll drop this chemical that makes fires bigger and crazier. And oh my gosh, like I read this incredible account of the firebombing we did at the German city of Dresden, and all those chemicals and all that fire on a hot, windy day, it created a fire tornado that started just sucking at people. Like it was almost like the wind was sucking people in. All the oxygen was being consumed in the entire city. And we thoroughly wrecked the cities of Hamburg, Dresden, and Tokyo. And by all accounts, the firebombing of Tokyo was one of the most deadly days in the history of the world. I can't even think of anything that would one-up it. Because sometimes students ask me, Mr. Brown, why didn't we drop the atomic bomb on Tokyo? Well, we already destroyed Tokyo. Tokyo was a smoldering mess. The whole city got wiped out by this fire tornado that we made over it. And we killed so many women, children, innocent people. So it's sort of like now we can ask this morality question, like who are the real bad guys in World War II? Obviously, the Nazis and the Japanese were super duper terrible for the things they did, but is America fully innocent as well? Because we turned these cities into ash, okay, killing huge numbers of women and children. I mean, it's true that every time we were saying, like, hey, we're about to bomb one of your cities, you should probably surrender the war. But these Axis countries never surrendered well, I mean, they did surrender, but they surrendered only after all this pain was done to them. So, yeah, it's definitely a debate I usually like to have with my students in class. All right, so let's check it out. This is what Tokyo looked like before World War II. This is what it looked like after World War II. Okay, why drop an atomic bomb on a city when it already looks like this? Because this was what Tokyo looked like that night, just huge fires raging all over the place, and just the whole city getting burned up. Here was a Nazi guy in the city of Dresden. See what we did to him there. And then, yep, the whole city got burned down. All right, I'll save this for my last video. Peace out.